My name is Bella, and today I want to tell you a story that turned my life around. It was an ordinary evening after a hard day's work. I returned home hoping to spend a quiet evening with my husband John. After all, we have been a happy family for several years, and it would seem that everything was going well with us. But this evening turned out to be far from ordinary. When I entered the house, tired and looking for comfort, my soul was not destined to find peace. My husband, John, came up to me with a serious expression on his face, and his words sounded like a bolt from the blue. "You have to leave and give the house to your sister." He said these words, and the world around me seemed to stop. I couldn't believe my ears. This house meant a lot more to me than just a piece of real estate. It was a symbol of my family's history, a legacy that my parents gave me. I cherished it like the most precious treasure, and I could not understand why John suddenly decided to take it away from me. However, the terrible story did not end there. John explained that the reason for this shocking demand was my brother-in-law, my sister's husband. My sister was married to a man who, as it turned out, did little for his family. His days were spent playing endless video games, and his family's financial situation was at risk because of his irresponsibility. My sister had 5 children, and her husband's indifference only made their plight worse. To somehow resolve this crisis in the family, John proposed an absurd solution: to evict me from my own house and allow my sister and her husband to move into it with their children. This proposal seemed to me not only absurd, but also unacceptable. The house belonged to me by right, and I wasn't going to give it up, especially in such circumstances. I started asking questions. "Why?" I asked, my eyes expressing complete bewilderment and concern. John just repeated that this was the only way out of the situation, and that if I refused, we would get a divorce. His words reverberated in my head like a loud bang. We have always been the model of a couple that friends and family, and even ourselves, have admired. My sister had 5 children, and she bore the entire burden of family finances. The indifference of her husband and his absence as a breadwinner only aggravated their plight. As I began to realize the essence of his proposal, my feelings were filled with indignation and misunderstanding. This house was not just a physical property. It was a living memorial of my parents and a symbol of everything they did for our family. Our family holidays were fraternized in this house. It was here that my parents raised me and passed on their values to me. To give it away, even in such difficult circumstances, was unacceptable for me. I felt that this was tantamount to betraying the memory of my parents and their wishes. My parents have always dreamed of this house becoming my shelter and a place for my future family. When John explained to me that my sister and her husband were facing financial difficulties because of her husband's indifference, I realized that he felt obligated to help them. But his offer was a sacrifice that he offered to make at the expense of our family. This requirement made me think seriously about the values that John and I shared and what really mattered to me. We found ourselves in a vicious circle of disagreements, and our arguments became increasingly heated. John resorted to various manipulative techniques, trying to undermine my confidence and squeeze me with guilt. He even threatened to divorce me, believing that it would force me to agree. But he deeply underestimated my determination and fortitude. Instead of breaking down, I grew and strengthened every day. This house, its significance, and our promises with my parents have become an integral part of my identity for me. I understood that by standing up for my rights and promises. With each passing day, our relationship became more and more heated. But I wasn't going to be manipulated by John. The support of friends and family who were concerned about my fate gave me strength and confidence. Thus, the threat of divorce has become a painful cloud hanging over us, forcing us to think about the future of our family and our values. but I refused to succumb to such manipulation. I understood that I could not allow John to take away my home from me and, consequently, part of my identity. A few weeks have passed, and the tension in our relationship has only been growing. I knew that my determination to stay in this house and defend my right to it, despite threats of divorce, was becoming the main force that moved me. I decided that I could no longer live in such a toxic environment and filed for divorce. John was sure that the divorce would cause me to sink into a deep depression, and he used it as a last attempt to manipulate me. But he greatly underestimated my ability to experience and adapt. The divorce process continued, and my life was full of new challenges and changes. Each of us was aggressive and determined. John did not want to give up a step, and I was also ready to fight to the end. Over time, I began to realize that each of us made the decision that seemed best at that time. My sister and her husband needed help, and John, although he did it in a very controversial way, tried to help the family. The most important thing is that I realized that I also deserved happiness and independence. The battle for the house continued, and our relationship became increasingly toxic. We spent days and nights in court, presenting our arguments before the judge. Each of us stubbornly adhered to his position, and the enmity between us grew every day. For me, this house remained a symbol of my independence and freedom. I couldn't afford to lose him, and my determination to keep him was unshakable. While John, persisting in his demands, became my enemy number one. The trial was emotionally and financially draining. We were looking for compromises, but they seemed unattainable. Everyone around us knew about our battle, and it became a topic of conversation in the family and among friends. But as the days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months, I began to wonder what price we were paying for this battle. My life was dragged into a whirlpool of conflict, and I gradually began to realize that this was destroying me as a person. My hatred of John has distorted my values and principles. I forgot about what it means to be a person, and not just a fighter for the house. The enmity between us led to the fact that we both became victims of our own hatred. And then one day, standing on the threshold of a destroyed house, I realized that the price we pay for this war is much higher than the value of real estate. We have lost a part of ourselves in this struggle. This house, which was once a place of happiness and love, has become a symbol of our destruction. We continued to meet in court, but not with such fury. Our bitter words and accusations gave way to fatigue and exhaustion. We realized that none of us would win in this fight. The house has become an empty shell, a reminder of our quarrels and breakup. As time passed, we both began to wonder if this battle was worth it. We destroyed not only our marriage, but also ourselves. Hatred and enmity did not give us the happiness that we were so eager to preserve. One day, standing on the threshold of an empty house, our eyes met. In John's eyes, I saw the weariness and sadness that I felt myself. We both realized that it was time to end this struggle and go our separate ways. However, as usual in our family saga, fate was preparing another surprise for us. One day, when I was sitting in my house and trying to start a new chapter in my life, I received a call from a lawyer. At first, I didn't understand why they were calling me, but then the lawyer told me about the shocking news. It turned out that my sister and her husband, who had previously experienced financial difficulties and were almost on the verge of divorce, won a huge cash prize in the lottery. The amount was staggering, and they suddenly became millionaires. This news completely stunned me. My sister, who previously did not know how to make ends meet, now suddenly became the owner of a huge fortune. It was a sudden turn of events that none of us expected. The news of my sister and her husband's win caused a lot of emotions inside me. On the one hand, I was happy for them because they were able to overcome their financial difficulties. On the other hand, it added complexity to our relationship since now I had another reason to worry about the fate of our house. The news of my sister and her husband winning was really overwhelming, but it soon became clear that this event had its own problems. It turned out that her husband, having gained access to a huge amount of money, began to behave completely irresponsibly. He started spending money on casino gambling and fancy parties while his family stayed away. My sister began to worry that he could exhaust the entire amount without providing even a small part to provide for the family. The situation became unlike a fairy tale about millions, but more like a nightmare. Money, which was supposed to solve financial problems, turned into a new problem. My sister was desperate. She understood that in this way, they could lose everything. When I found out about it, my reaction was complicated. On the one hand, I was disappointed by her husband's behavior and worried about the future of my sister and her children. On the other hand, I saw it as an opportunity to help the family and perhaps find a way out of a difficult situation. I decided to meet with my sister and discuss how we can solve this problem together. We sat in her house, where there was a tense atmosphere, and discussed possible steps. It was obvious that her husband needed help and support. He was so fixated on his gambling passions that he refused to listen to reasonable advice. We understood that we would have to take drastic measures to save the family budget from complete ruin. The situation in my sister's family was getting worse every day. Her husband continued to lose money gambling, and his gambling addiction became more and more destructive. The family was on the verge of breaking up, and my sister was in despair. However, my ex-husband, John, came into play here. He heard about the problems of my sister's family and decided to contribute to the resolution of this situation. Despite all our differences and the battle for the house, he understood that the family needed help. John began researching the treatment of ludomania and found a specialist specializing in helping people with this addiction. He persuaded my former son-in-law to turn to this specialist, and after some hesitation, he agreed. The treatment was a long and difficult process. My sister began to support her husband on the road to recovery. They both went through numerous therapy sessions, and my ex-husband John was always there to support them both. Over time, the situation began to improve. My ex-husband helped them manage their finances and recover some of the money that was lost in gambling. He was a man with experience in financial matters, and his advice was invaluable. When my sister and her husband were finally able to overcome addiction and regain control of their lives, they suddenly found that they had the means to start all over again. My sister and her husband, along with my ex-husband, decided to buy a new house. This house has become a symbol of a new beginning for my sister's family. It was far away from places associated with gambling and represented a blank slate on which they could begin to build their future lives. As events unfolded in my sister's family, I began to remember things for which I once loved my husband John. His determination and ability to act in difficult situations have always amazed me. He was a man of his word and was always there when he needed support. By helping my sister and her husband cope with addiction, he demonstrated his willingness to do everything possible to help them. His skills in financial matters and his ability to find solutions in difficult situations were incredibly valuable. I saw him in a whole new light. Instead of seeing him only as a man who tried to take my house away from me, I saw him as a man who tried to help my sister and her children because they needed it most of all. At some point, when we were sitting together with my sister and her family, I remembered the words that John used to say to me in difficult moments. He always said that he loved me and was ready to support me in difficult times. And he did it not only in words, but also in actions. Inspired by his determination and willingness to help gratuitously, I decided it was time to forget about our differences and the battle for the house. We were both proud and stubborn, but it was more important to find a way to reconciliation and a new beginning. John and I met, and I told him about how my family coped with difficulties and how he helped them. He smiled and said that this was the most important thing he had done recently. Thus, we reconciled, realizing that family and helping loved ones are most important. We decided to forget about the past offenders and start anew. Our divorce was annulled, and we decided to give each other support and love, as we did at the beginning of our marriage.